This question from Fatima on YouTube. Considering their dominance in qualifying, can Spain be considered favourites for the World Cup? Andy?
You know what? We sort of touched on this yesterday in the main show, didn't we? When Lars was saying all roads lead to France. I think there's a strong case for France, but every time I see Spain, I'm trying to look for a reason why they can't be considered favourites. It's increasingly hard to. Now, look, I realised when they played Georgia in the first of the two games, Kvaratskhelia is not at his absolute peak of fitness at the moment, but he was there nevertheless. And Georgia have a decent side. Spain won 2-0, but absolutely marmalised them. They were so good. And this is Spain at the moment without Lamine Yamal. And I think that's the really interesting thing, that when you think of how different Spain are from the Euro 2008, World Cup 2010, Euro 2012 champions, they're different in a lot of ways in terms of the structure of the team, in terms of the players they produce. Football has changed so much in that time. So I think people will look at them casually and think, oh, it's all just possession, isn't it? It's way different to that. It's way, way, way different to that. And I think in terms of the biggest question over what they can do at this World Cup coming is, I think, especially when you look at the temperatures, and especially when you look at the current calendar, again, which is something that we keep mentioning, but there's no real way of avoiding it. The big question to me is, do Spain have it in them to play like the 2010 World Cup team who used possession as containment? Because that is yet to be proven, because that could be absolutely key. If you had Spain's World Cup 2010 team playing in this World Cup coming in 2026, they'll win it hands down. Not just because they're a set of good players, but because of the way they played. Because so much of international football, and Lars again talked yesterday very eloquently about how the tempo is different in international football. So much of that is caused by the calendar. And I think once you get to the end of this season, and many of Spain's best players have played, say, 60 games, I think having a system or an ability to regulate the tempo and slow it down, I think will be enormously important. And the way they did that in 2010 Spain, using possession as defence, as containment, I think is something that, if there was a team that could do that in World Cup 2026, they win. I don't think there's any doubt about that at all. So questions are, what sort of nick are the players in? Can they do something similar to the 2010 team? And what about those key players in terms of the intensity of their minutes and how they're managed? And remember, there's also the question, when we're talking about this, lingering over from Hansi Flick, of him complaining, and you know, he won't be the only club coach to do this, him saying, well, I don't think Lamine Yamal's being looked after properly. Well, maybe not from a Barcelona perspective, but from a Spain perspective, we'll know when it comes to June, won't we?
So that's the funny thing. Like I said yesterday, I had to field a question recently on like who would be favourites to win the World Cup, and I just instinctively said France, because when you think about it, man for man, that squad looks the scariest to me.
Agreed.
But of course, it's not just about man for man in these international tournaments. And I think the thing I talked about yesterday about World Cup football, tournament, international football being very different to club football, I stand by that, but I also feel like Spain in recent years are the national team that's almost looked like an exception. Whether that's because of the quality and of the coaching these players have had when they're younger, that there are certain basic principles that they all understand in terms of movement and how to use space, etc., or whether it's because De La Fuente is just picking players who have very good chemistry and find each other. When you watch the Spanish national team, it does feel more like watching a club side. I think that's what we all felt at the Euros, and I think they've carried that on into the qualifiers. They do seem to, the passes connect quicker in a way they don't always do for other very, very good international teams. And I feel like there are fewer uncertainties in terms of what the team's going to look like selection-wise. With France, we don't exactly know what the shape of that front three or even the front four, if it is that. We don't know exactly what the midfield is going to be. We look at the back line and the Saliba-Upamecano duo is amazing on paper, but it hasn't always been rock solid in practice. They've conceded some goofy goals over the last couple of years, France. So this idea that France will turn in to a super physically capable, super tight, super organized, deepish team and then Dembele and Mbappe will run everyone to death down the other end. In theory, they have the people to do that, but we don't know if that's going to work yet. Whereas with Spain, they're just ticking along in that midfield. The Pedri, Zubimendi, Merino midfield, is that the most balanced and sort of complementary midfield trio in international football? I would be inclined to say yes. I think that's the midfield that makes the most sense. That's like a midfield you would construct for a club team, really, with three guys who have different skill sets and work really well together. Lamine Yamal, he's so young, but already looks set to be one of the best sort of forwards in the world. You have a completely different proposition in Nico Williams, who adds the sort of explosivity and pace that he does. Maybe you ask questions up front, but Oyarzabal is doing a really good job in that role. Maybe the centre half, like Huijsen and Lenormand or Laporte and Lormand, with some pretty attacking fullbacks with Porro if he plays. Okay, some defensive vulnerabilities, but like Andy's touching on, this is a team that's likely going to keep a ton of possession, or certainly should be capable of doing that. So they're going to shield the defense by just not letting that get run at so much. So yeah, back to the original question, can Spain be considered favorites? In terms of the bookies, I think they are the favorites right now. And when you go through the team and you see how settled it looks and you look at the other favorites where there are more question marks, I think that's very, very justifiable.
Yeah, this question is from Aaron on email. What went wrong for Adi Hütter during his time at Monaco? Where do they go with this squad that's packed with talent, Andy?
It's funny, when I look at what happened for Adi Hütter at Monaco, I kind of think it's less of an Adi Hütter thing and more of a Monaco thing. Now, when we think of football in the south of France and high tension and combustibility and
Marseille, you're
changes
talking about?
in mood. Well, that's it. We think of Marseille, don't we? But Monaco, which is, in terms of passion, not such a football hotbed. AS Monaco is an extremely historical club that's won loads of stuff over the years. And even if, in terms of on the match day, there's a lot less pressure externally, internally, there's a lot of pressure. You're talking about a club that's Russian-owned with heavy royal involvement, and a lot is expected of them. And I think really, if you go back to the last really great Monaco team, so the team that wins the league and gets semi-finals of the Champions League in 2017 before Kylian Mbappe goes off, and obviously all those other players, we've said a lot of times their plan at the start of the summer was to sell Bernardo Silva and Timur Bakayoko, and then everyone else goes as well. I think they found it quite hard to get back on an even keel after that. So they've had some good and successful sporting directors and developers of youth since. They've had some good and successful coaches since, although Leonardo Jardim wasn't as good the second time as he was the first time, obviously, and is not in European football anymore, which I think is a bit of a shame. But I think for any good coach, and Adi Hütter is demonstrably a good coach, I think if you're lasting 2 years there, I think that's par. I think to me that feels fine. Now, if we're looking at the start of this season and why it's been difficult for him, now if we look at the combustibility of the club, Hütter's there for 2 years. There are at least 4 points during those 2 years where they could have easily sacked him. Monaco being Monaco, and that his sacking was under definite consideration. But where it reaches really fever pitch is the fact that at the start of this season, they haven't had a disgraceful start to the season by any stretch of the imagination, but they've had a difficult start to the season. They've let in a ton of goals, which has been a problem. I think the opening Champions League game at Club Brugge, where they get absolutely panelled, is embarrassing, and that's something that's hard to crawl out from under, even though there was that whole weird situation on the way where they had that malfunction with the plane where they got stuck in it with broken air conditioning and all the players stripped down to their pants, as everyone's probably seen. It's ridiculous. But really, I think that was an example of everything that could go wrong is going wrong there. And also, any coach at Monaco is completely beholden to the fact that you're given the players you're given, and you're tasked with getting the best out of those players and developing the youngsters, because they always have excellent academy prospects, as Aaron touches at in his question. And that is a big responsibility. Now, I think the thing that's happened this summer is they've gone out and they've signed Paul Pogba, who's still not played and is not going to play immediately after the international break because he picked up another injury. Eric Dyer, who alternatively has done very, very well, and Ansu Fati, who numbers-wise has started pretty well. But there's a lot of pressure on getting the best out of those. Now, Dyer's good as gold. He looks after himself. But in terms of...
He even scores for them.
Yeah, he did well if they let him take the pens.
Yeah.
And I think if you look at Pogba is a case apart, you can't really be tasked with bringing him back to... Who knows what he can come back to? And then you look at Fati, who obviously was brilliant when he came through and has had a lot of injuries since. So again, I think it's a lot over to the medical staff in terms of how to deal with him. But do you centre your team around those guys? I think the best thing you can do, and certainly in terms of Aaron's point about a squad that's packed with talent and young talent, use those guys to help develop the young guys. So I think that's going to be particularly important because they've got a young coach in who's accomplished, Sébastien Pocognoli. Of course, he's won the Belgian league with Union Saint-Gilloise, which is not to be sniffed at. But, I mean, he's taken a big risk quitting them a couple of games into a Champions League campaign to go into a job which, if you told me that Pocognoli was going to get sacked after 8 months, I wouldn't be massively surprised. It's a very particular pressure, a sort of hidden pressure to meet expectation from upstairs, to develop those young players. And I think, especially as he's such a young coach, he needs to lean on Pogba. If Pogba never plays for them, he can help those young players a lot. And he's a big personality. I think that's really important. Fati, who's been a young player who's dealt with a lot of pressure and has dealt with a lot of other stuff since, he can help them. And Eric Dyer's just Eric Dyer. He's your perfect older brother. So I think leaning on those guys is very, very important for Pocognoli. And not everything that went wrong at Monaco is down to Adi Hütter.
Yeah, let's move on with this question from Tony on email. Lars, European sides, and this is a controversial question, actually. I've been talking about this with some people as well, but European sides held discussions about using six substitutes. What impact could this have on the way a 90-minute game is played? Obviously, it'll be advantageous to some clubs and not to others, I'd have thought.
I just saw this story. I just thought it was weird that, because this was a news story doing the rounds this week. I find it odd that these clubs and these sort of so-called European football clubs, organizations are even discussing this, because they don't decide the rules. That's not up to them. That's what IFAB do. They don't have any authority for this, so they can discuss whatever they want. It's got nothing to do with them, really. And yeah, they have no authority over that. But okay, sure, they were discussing this. And the context, as I understand it, was that there are concerns. I mean, players have threatened it has been mooted that players might go on strike. I mean, I don't think this will happen. I don't think there's no organization there for that to happen. And the reason that's even being discussed is because players feel they're being overworked because because the calendar is so tight now. There's so many games. I feel like the Club World Cup felt like a tipping point to a lot of people, because the idea that even in non-tournament summers, a lot of players will be asked to play throughout the summer. The holiday periods are just disappearing. And because of that, there is now a drive towards looking at this, at least on some level, to see what can be done to ease the burden on the players. But if that's the motivation behind opening up to the idea of having bigger squads and more substitutions, I feel like it's kind of perverse that it's the big clubs driving this conversation, because let's be clear, the European Football Clubs organization is completely run by the biggest clubs on the continent and exists to further their agendas. They're the ones who are pushing for more games. They're the ones who are pressuring the authorities to get them more money, bigger television deals, more prize pot. We want more money all the time. Guys, if you're wondering why the players are getting burned out and getting tired, I suggest investing in a mirror. You might find the answer easier than you think. So this is what I find, like this organization that has no responsibility or authority over making the rules are discussing how to fix the problems they themselves have created because they want to make more money. Like, I don't have a lot of sympathy for anyone in this setting. But more specifically, I guess it's an interesting thought experiment. How would it affect the game if you had one more sub? And I gotta be honest, I don't necessarily hate, because I think there is a development generally in the sport that the tempo is getting higher, the intensity is getting higher, and I don't think having 5 subs instead of 3, which a lot of people felt would be a very, very bad move for the sport, I don't think that's been bad at all. I think that's been fine. I don't think football has been degraded as a spectator experience since we introduced 5 substitutions. I think it's opened up a few sort of interesting tactical things, which is fascinating to me. I think knowing that you have 5 subs has allowed coaches, for instance, to tell some of the more physically intensive positions, say if you're playing with wingbacks or very attacking fullbacks, you can tell your players, look, give it absolutely everything you have, and when you are empty, I will sub you. Like, don't worry about making the 90 minutes. It's fine. It has opened up some options. I think it also makes it a little bit easier to give minutes to young players. Because if you have 3 subs, maybe you hold 1 or 2 back knowing that you could have injuries, you could get a red card, you want that flexibility. If you have more subs, maybe it's easier to throw on a kid for 20 minutes towards the end. I don't hate that as a development. And maybe another sub, I don't think it would ruin the game as we know it. It would change it, but it would change it in the way that so far I'm okay with, personally, subjectively. But I think the motivation behind it, this idea that, oh no, the players are very tired, what should we do about it? It is your fault, big clubs. Stop pushing everyone to make you more money. You make enough money as it is. Just stop. We need fewer games in the calendar is what we need. And that would involve the big clubs maybe making a little bit less money, and they don't want that.
Andy, I suppose Billy Joel would say it's the American way. You know, you have one team, you have another sub-team ready to come on at any moment. However, if all teams are made equal, fair enough, but this will surely... it will benefit the teams with the bigger squads.
Yeah, it absolutely will. There's no doubt about it. And I guess from a football players' union perspective, is quite attractive because the money tap doesn't get turned off, and the way you deal with the fact that the calendar is what it is. And I think that's it. You have to deal with what there is at the moment rather than how you would ideally like things to be. And as Lars says, the players' interests and the club's interests are slightly divergent, more than slightly divergent in this case. Ultimately, from a players' union perspective, you're getting more players employed, aren't you? If everyone needs 6 subs a game, or the option of 6 subs a game. In terms of player development, in terms of continuity, in terms of what it means for the game as a spectacle, I don't think any of those things are particularly positive. But yeah, I can understand why those discussions exist in the current environment for sure.
Lars, this question from Pete on X. Are there depth issues in Germany's national team? Their bench looked sparse against Northern Ireland.
So there are 2 things here. I mean, I do wonder if there are some names on that bench that the Germans had against Northern Ireland that are good Bundesliga players that maybe don't have the international reputation. Yet someone like Stiller from Stuttgart is a very good midfielder. A lot of people outside of Germany won't be familiar with him. Burkhardt is playing well for Frankfurt, but again, doesn't have an international profile. So maybe it's a consequence of the prestige of the Bundesliga, maybe not being that high, and people aren't familiar with the guys who are playing there, who are not necessarily playing well in the Champions League. But having said that, it's not. I don't disagree with the statement. Like they looking at that bench, they were very short on what you would call game changers, people who can come on and like really do something. And yeah, Musiala is injured, so that's one guy out. You look at Leroy Sané, who's gone off to Galatasaray. I mean, Nagelsmann has said that since he's playing in Turkey, he has to deliver to a very high standard for the national team to consider him. Wouldn't be surprised to see someone like Kevin Schade from Brentford end up in the World Cup squad just because he offers something completely different. Someone who's both fast and strong. But yeah, when you're using the sentence like, I expect to see Kevin Schade from Brentford in the Germany squad for the World Cup, maybe that is an answer to the question that's being posed.
Slightly disrespectful, maybe.
Yeah, and maybe that also says something about the financial wealth of the Premier League. That even
Absolutely does.
Even a club like Brentford is I mean, Schade would be playing for one of the Champions League chasing teams in Germany if he was there. On a broader perspective about Germany, I would refer you to a piece by Jonathan Harding in DW over the summer, looking into how actually there has been a drop in participation in youth football in Germany in recent years. So, and quite shockingly, the number is that since 2006, so in the last 20 years, the country has lost almost 6,000 men's under 17 and under 19 teams, and that's quite something. Like that's a lot. That seems like a big thing. That maybe this sort of conveyor belt of talent that Germany were rightly praised for having set up, and which kind of, in a sense, culminated in winning the World Cup in Brazil. There seems to be a real drop in youths of people in their mid to late teens taking football seriously and playing football, and it has triggered a discussion in Germany about how they develop kids and whether everyone is being included and whether enough people are being kept in the game. And it's clear that if you have lower participation at those levels, if during the years when you decide, do I want to go all in on football? Do I want to pursue the possibility of doing this for a living? If at those ages more people are dropping off, then that will affect the number of options you have coming through, which will ultimately filter all the way up to the national team.
And I think that's probably something more to worry about in years to come. I mean, if we're talking about the current Germany squad, I don't think there's anything wrong with those players they've brought on. As Lars says, I think some of those go under the radar, like Angelo Stiller, who's been mentioned with the possibility of ending up following Xabi Alonso from the Bundesliga to Spain and ended up at Real Madrid at some point. I think there's a lot to suggest he's got the level for it. I think you look at those players that came on against Northern Ireland, Bayer, Anton, Burkhardt, 30 million players. Baku is good, and Robert Andrich, that they have to take him to the World Cup. You need someone who's a leader like that, and maybe that's something that Germany's lost. And I think when we're talking about developing players, obviously we all think of teen players when we're developing players. I think the question is, has the coaching been good enough to develop players in their 20s, like already professional players? That's the question, because all of those on ability, I've not got any doubt about those. Burkhardt scored 18 Bundesliga goals for Mainz last season, for goodness sakes, which is amazing, and took them to the brink of the Champions League, even if they ended up in the conf in the end. But look, I think if you look at Bayer and Anton particularly, players who both went to Borussia Dortmund for a lot of money, having excelled in the Bundesliga, and how have they really developed since? Like, Anton is just about finding his feet at Dortmund, but look, he looked a bust for a lot of his first season, and I think that's a concern. And you know, when we talk about Dortmund, I think are a good example of this, a team that we talk about as developers of players. As I've said before, I think to credit them with Haaland and Bellingham is just Jude Bellingham is just a little bit, you know, those are generational talents. So to sit there and go, oh, Borussia Dortmund made these guys, I think is a little bit intellectually dishonest. I think if you look at the bigger picture, you look at Anton, and particularly someone like Bayer, who excelled at Hoffenheim, who's clearly got a lot of natural talent. They buy him for 30 million and they've got no plan about how they're going to use him at all. So if Bayer's not at a level where he can come off the bench and affect a game for Dortmund, and he's getting closer to that. I think he made some useful contributions in the Champions League at the back end of last season. He's had some good games this season. But to buy a player like that and not really have a plan, I mean, in a way, Dortmund, and I don't just want to single them out for this, but that idea of them as, we think of them as a great developer of talent, I think how they see themselves, certainly internally, it's a bit of a junior Bayern, really. You know, we're going to go and nick the best of the rest from elsewhere in the Bundesliga. And that, you know, they did that not the summer just that we've just gone through, but the last summer of 2024, when they buy the two flagship players, Guirassy and Anton from Stuttgart, the team who finished second. Guirassy has done very well. Anton kind of up and down. If those players had gone, if we're going back like 15 years when Bayern was still doing that, those players go to Bayern and they become better. There's no doubt about that. All right, you might have the occasional one that doesn't work, but those players are developed into top level players. Are Dortmund doing that? And are other clubs doing that? I think that has to be the question. Why is it that we're looking at Bayer and Anton coming off the bench, or maybe even Baku, and thinking, you know, those are players who've got the ability to be important players for Germany, but you know, they're not quite at that level where they can be game changers yet. And I think you have to look at the coaching they're getting.
I would also just briefly add that it's interesting. If you look at the attack, since the question was about the bench against Northern Ireland, if you look at the attacking options they have to bring on, it is Maxi Bayer, it's Jonathan Burkhardt, who again, great last season for Mainz, and Felix Nemcha maybe is someone you would count as an attacking player, more of a midfielder, but he gets forward. Those are all guys who, if you asked to describe them as footballers, you'd say good athletes, run a lot, press well, good team players, I would say as well. And clearly the product of a system that puts an emphasis on pressing, which is very logical when you think of how German football has been successful over the last 15 years. But I do wonder, has something gotten lost in the wash here a little bit in terms of where are the Mavericks here? Where are the technicians? Where are the creative players? And obviously Musiala is injured and that is a huge loss. And you've got Woltemade, who's a really exciting and weird profile that's come through. Love that. Tall man with good technique and stuff. But broadly speaking, if you compare it to England, I know this is on the continent, but just because the big discourse in England has been, okay, if Jude Bellingham is dropped, maybe not dropped, maybe fit, not fit, whatever. You've got so many options in that sort of creative area. You can throw in Cole Palmer. You got Morgan Rogers has been playing, has been doing well. Morgan Gibbs-White is lurking in the background as an option in this sort of role. James Maddison is great at that, but currently injured. These sort of creative guys, Germany are maybe not producing a ton of them right now.
It feels quite a homogenous production line, doesn't it?
Yeah, a lot of, and I know this. I'm kind of contradicting myself a little bit because from the Lewandowski segment yesterday, I displayed a slight obsession with forward to press because I think it matters a lot in that kind of system. But Germany maybe have, like, they produce these good team players, fit guys, hard workers, you know, absolutely 100% good players to have. I want a bit more chaos in this group. I think we're lacking a maverick. We're lacking invention. We're lacking creativity. We're lacking those guys. And when you have a generation where there seems to be such a clear lack of that, I think that's we always read too much maybe into the senior national team and what they actually say about the whole of development for a game in a sport. So maybe we're overreacting. But I think it's not unfair to say, if you have a generation where there is a distinct lack of these creative thinkers on the pitch, these maverick types, I think it's worth looking at the coaching and how kids are treated and whether those qualities are being encouraged at academy level.
I'll be digging out my Max Cruiser Lego figure later. There's no doubt about that.
Bring him back.
This final question from Eric on Instagram. We've seen real dominance so far from Norway in the World Cup qualifiers. Is this down to individual talent or is there more behind it? We talked about Sweden on OTC yesterday. Norway, brother, sister nation, doing quite the opposite.
What a week for me to be on the continent. A whole segment in the main show on Sweden being terrible, and then we get the Norway question. No, listen, there are a few things going on. The headline grabbing stuff for Norway is obviously, you can't get around it. Erling Haaland is back in like total freak mode. Like he is peak Erling Haaland at the minute, and will score goals against any opposition you put him up against right now. He is so good. It's so fun to watch, and that is obviously helpful. Let's be very clear about that. But I have always felt that for this Norway team to be successful, it is about more than Haaland. We talked about Sørloth sacrificing for the team in the main show. That's been a huge factor in terms of finding a balance there. But I feel like we're also starting to maybe find a defense that makes some kind of sense, because that has been our big issue. The personnel in the back four is individually maybe not as impressive as it is in other areas of the pitch. Christopher Aya playing centre half regularly for Brentford is very helpful for us. He had a period where he played a lot of right back for Brentford, or outside right centre half in a back three, overlapping and all of this. We really need him to be our leader in the centre of defence and mature into that player, because we don't have a ton of options. Finding the right balance in midfield is all this sort of stuff. Like, I keep comparing Norway to the Welsh team that got to the semis of Euro 2016, because everyone will look at that team and think of Gareth Bale being incredible and of Aaron Ramsey pulling the strings. And this is us with Martin Ødegaard and Erling Haaland, right? But for that team to achieve that, they also needed Ashley Williams being a leader at the back. They also needed Joe Allen and Joe Ledley running their socks off in midfield. They needed Ben Davies as this ever reliable, steady figure. Like, yeah, Gareth Bale doesn't get to fire them into the European semis if you don't have that around him. And that has been the issue for us in the years we've had Ødegaard and Haaland so far, is that the supporting cast we haven't found the right balance, the right structure, and we maybe haven't had the right characters. That feels like it's changing now. And it's a big thing, something they talk about that I want to bring up. They've talked about there's been a shift in attitude internally last couple of years, that they're being a little bit more, I think the phrase was, they're being more honest with each other, demanding a little bit more of each other, being a little bit less Scandinavian and nice to each other, and actually speaking up if something's not right. Haaland and Ødegaard both had to take on leading roles for this team when they were still very young. They're now gaining more experience and more ready to take on those leadership roles. There was a very good, I hope you should seek this out if you can. They mic'd up Erling for a training session during this camp. Obviously he speaks in Norwegian, but it's been translated as well as a little social media clip. And it's funny because it's Erling being Erling, and you can see how passionate he is in training and how much he cares about winning like mini games in training. Like, he is obsessive about this stuff. But there's also so many little cases of him giving little nudges to less experienced teammates. A little dig at Oscar Bob for not running enough. Asking Thelu Asgard of Rangers, what did you do last night? Have you been drinking or something? Like, you can tell him in a quite gentle and bantery way, setting standards, not in a mean way, but in a sort of like, come on, like this is serious. Let's do this. And for your leading players, your superstars, to accept that responsibility and take it on in a good, but positive and constructive way, I think is super, super important. So there's a lot of things going right for Norway at the moment, and it's very good for me to see, of course.
Yeah, question that Leadbelly asked, Margot, what did you sleep last night? That's not the question that any Norwegian would ask of another Norwegian, but that's it. It comes to that time where we ask you both to suggest a game of the week. Each week we recommend a game for you to watch on the weekend. And just as importantly, we also suggest the food you should be having with it. Lars, you get first pick. What are you going for this week?
No nonsense. We're going straight in. Tonight, Friday night, we are still in the part of the season where I am hoping we can have a fun title race in Liga. It hasn't been put to bed yet, obviously, because it's still early in the season. So it's let's root for everyone who could feasibly take points off of PSG season is where we are in the year. And this is that they're playing Strasbourg at home. And this is something, obviously, that's been brought up on the pod. Bluco, Strasbourg, that whole thing. And supposedly the positive of essentially becoming another team's feeder club, of becoming like a subsidiary of Chelsea, is that Bluco can provide you with resources, theoretically also know-how, but certainly resources to build something that can maybe make more of an impact in the league than Strasbourg could be if they were still an independent, football club. And yeah, so far this season, they're 1 point behind PSG. 7 games in, 5 wins and 2 defeats, just 1 point behind PSG at the top of the league. So they go to Paris to take them on. I don't particularly think they'll get anything from this. But but it's a Friday night, club football's back after international break. Let's see if Strasbourg can go to Paris Saint-Germain and make it uncomfortable for them.
And what will we be eating with that, Lars?
Yeah, let's just keep it simple and have some steak frit. It's Friday night. Don't overcomplicate this. We've all had a long working week. Steak frit, steak and fries, and just have a good glass of wine with that as well. Yeah.
Yeah, keep it simple. They'll be coming on the pitch to Phil Collins. It's what we all want. Come on.
Not a Bayern, though. You're going for Bayern Munich versus Borussia Dortmund, Andy.
Yeah, and look, it's kind of obligatory to go for the Klassiker. but I can't be the only person approaching this with a little bit of trepidation. Bayern look incredible so far this season. Dortmund had that minor stutter before the international break with just drawing at home with Leipzig, which on its own is not a terrible result or an unacceptable result. But the whole thing that I took from that Dortmund-Leipzig is the next best are nowhere near as good as Bayern. So Dortmund, who have actually got over their phobia they have of going to the Allianz Arena over the last couple of seasons and have got some better results there. I think they need a result here for the good of the league, really. If they go there and get absolutely smashed, I think collectively for everyone who's not a Bayern fan, it will feel like pretty flattening. But look, Bayern look incredible so far, particularly in the front half of the team. Michael Elise is obviously we're talking about Harry Kane, but Michael Elise's played brilliantly, although he wasn't great on international duty for France. So he'll want to get back into it. They've coped with the absence of Jamal Musiala brilliantly. So yeah, I just want to see some competition from this. That would be the ideal thing. Now, of course, winter is almost drawing in.
Keep it simple.
So it's Schweinehaxer season, which is pork knuckle. For those of you who are a little bit more adventurous and kinky, chuck a Weisswurst in there as well. Not really my bag, but you know, why not? Why not? But yeah, this is either going to be like the opening scene of Frozen, or it's going to be the winter of our discontent. So we're going to find out.
Indeed, and that's Saturday at 5:30. Make sure you eat well. So thank you for listening to Ask OTC. If you'd like to ask a question, you can contact us at any time at OTC Pod, and you can also email us otc@footballramble.com.